So I'm Michael Copeland. I'm with Andreessen Horowitz, and we are lucky today to have James Bashara, founder and CEO of Tilt, and Ryan Spoon, SVP digital product of a network we all love, ESPN. So, and
we have one fan.
Ryan, we're going to get to fandom. Ryan has been a startup entrepreneur, started and sold a company, worked at eBay, been a venture capitalist. You've been busy. We're going to talk a little bit about fantasy football. So that derelict pastime of some people I know. Anyone here play fantasy football? Raise your hand. On ESPN, I'm guessing? Hopefully? Okay. So we're going to get into that. It might seem at first blush this is sort of an odd pairing. ESPN, big sports network. Tilt, you guys are a platform for crowdfunding. And yet, you guys managed to pull off a project together. So I want you guys to just start about how did that project come together, what was it, and we'll get into the details of how it worked. So Ryan, how did you make this man's acquaintance?
So probably like a lot of folks in this room, we were privileged to spend time at what I think you guys call the executive briefing days.
Yep, the EBC.
And a couple of us from ESPN flew out, spent a day with at your lovely headquarters, and in 6 hours probably met 15 companies. This was one of them, and we walked out of there actually with a couple deals, a couple interesting partnerships. But that's how we first met. At that day, actually, I think we'll talk about it, but James and team threw out a couple ideas. This was the one we found to be most lasting, fitted into our calendar, and built the relationship since.
So James, like, how did you walked in there, ESPN? I know you're a big fan of just sports in general, but ESPN in particular. How did you find a fit between what Tilt does, and you can describe that briefly, and what ESPN does?
So Tilt, we build crowdfunding software for the web, for the world. The two big differentiators between us and anyone else is we focus on the consumer side, smaller, more bite-sized crowdfunding campaigns that might be 15 people and a birthday, 20 people and a tailgate, 10 people in a fantasy football league. The other big reason, or the other big differentiator we have, is that we've been building these platform tools, these extensible tools for brands to be able to build on top of our crowdfunding software. So some really cool brands have built on top of it. But going into the meeting with ESPN, what was so easy for us and what actually guides our partnership strategy is the behavior was already happening on Tilt.com. There was already people pooling money for fantasy football leagues in troves. So that is such a great North Star for us to know where there's going to be really interesting partnership.
So people were already getting together on Tilt to put the money pot, whoever wins gets X amount, and here we'll all
big time. It's one of the first things that we noticed when we built the site people were using it for.
And so, Ryan, what made it a good fit for you guys? And I want to get in also to big organization working with a startup, what that was like. But what did you see, and then how did you move forward?
So I think the first, if you had a North Star, ours was fantasy for us has become such a fundamentally important part of our digital experience. And it is a massive population of highly active people, but in small pockets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
how massive?
We'll have, I think, across all of our fantasy games this year, 15 million players. They make up, they are the most active users on the site. Right. So as example, this past month was across ESPN our historically great month, year over year across multiple, measurements, 30-40% growth. We did 10 billion minutes across all ESPN digital. 10
billion?
Across all digital, and over 1.5 billion of that was fantasy. I mean, it is a very significant, sticky, highly engaged. The other really fascinating part is the activity changes so significantly based on where you are and what time of day. So there's preseason, there's draft, and then what you do on Sunday is very different than Monday, and so forth. And your behaviors, whether it's on a device, mobile, big screen, time of day, our most active day of the year is Sunday. Mm-hmm. And coincidentally, we do not have NFL Sunday on our air. Fantasy makes up a big chunk of that. So what we, I think, collectively identified was, if you think about that calendar of fantasy usage, a very core part of the pre and draft is how you collect a team together, how you collect 12 people together and facilitate that interaction. And that's something that both at scale, but also as you divide it by 10, 12 users, it was a very natural fit.
So what did you guys actually build or work together on? What did it look like, and then how did it work?
Yeah, so it's very super simple. Think of it kind of like just a button that takes you to a group, kind of like a group PayPal is an easy way to think about it. A button from ESPN and their fantasy football league that takes you to espn.tilt.com. That's a co-branded, really simple user experience for 10, 12, 14 people to be able to pay together for their fantasy football league. What's unique about it is it's something that group payments, and we facilitate 5,000 people pooling together money for a crowdfunding campaign, or 15 people. But we're seeing this a lot too, these smaller groups, 8, 10, 12 people doing things together over and over and over again, and collecting money is a pain in the ass. With ESPN and fantasy football, they have the core user behavior, which is the league, which is your draft, which is, if you've ever seen it or done it, it's their tool is end-to-end the best out there for doing that. But this one little piece of payments and collecting the money for it was kind of a decision on their end. Do they build or buy? Do they build it themselves? Or do they let someone else take care of this piece of it? And for us, it was just, honestly, it was a lot of luck and harmony in that they just took the courage to work with a 2-year-old company. We're
so let's talk about that courage.
Small company.
You know, I mean,
a lot of courage.
Yeah, you seem very courageous. But like, what were you worried about from your end? And then how did you, as a startup, a 2-year-old company, make him less worried, I guess, if in fact you were?
So I was never worried about product fit, right? We identified this collectively. It was a pain point and addressed the problem. I was never really worried about how to integrate it, and this is actually something that we generally think a lot about: where it would sit, how it would fit, what's the friction, etc. The two things we always think about, and we do a fair amount of work with, startup younger companies. The first is scale. We're not the size of Facebook per se, but the scale we have is actually pretty complicated because it's very intense at an intense point in time and very data heavy. So we had to get comfortable with scale. And the second is, and this is what I, on my side think a lot about, regardless of partnership, we live in a very calendared world in sports.
Right.
NBA kicks off tonight. There's also a game 6. Fantasy football starting, and we launch in the middle of July. You got to be there. It's going without you. And so we need to make sure that our product roadmaps, our business roadmaps, that those sync according to a schedule that's not flexible.
And how did you guys sink into that?
Well, Ryan's downplaying it because I'd say him and George Limer, who's here somewhere. There's George. Those two guys, it's a lot more courage than what they're making it out to be. I mean, and we met and then closed the deal. I think once it launched, it was from the meeting, maybe 16 months. But it was something to unpack what he's saying about the intense moment. It is like a tidal wave to where they launch fantasy football and this needs to work. It's not this button that they add in and on Thursday it's not working, so they take it out, or there's a bug, so they roll it back. It was, in all of their emails, it was on it still is on every single page. And it really hits you on 2-3 days. Right. And it's 15 million users across their fantasy products. So it was something that it might not be the scale traffic of Facebook, but by far exceeds anything we've seen from any other site because of how intense it was. So for them, and I, when you're in the moment, it's like, of course they should do this. Of course they should partner with us.
Like,
but now,
God,
looking back, it is. I've got to hand it to Ryan for just the courage of actually going with it, because a big company like ESPN has so much to lose actually in these moments where it's faulty, it doesn't work, or it is, you're dealing with, we're PCI level 1 compliant, and we cross every T, dot every I on everything we do because we're holding people's money. But that's a huge courageous bet.
Did you ever get nervous or have courage on your question your courage?
Let's see.
Should I have re-questioned?
Yeah, I was nervous for about 7 weeks leading up to it. I mean, it's something we've worked with Microsoft, with Dick's Sporting Goods, with some really cool brands, Lululemon. We've worked with some really cool brands, but that intensity and how it is our core demographic. You know, our biggest demographic is 18 to 24-year-olds. So it was going to be the perfect partnership if we were to outline one for us. And yeah, I think I was pretty nervous.
Did your own fantasy football league play suffer as a result?
It has suffered a little bit, and one of our guys, Brian, is here. We're in the league together. It has suffered a little bit. I had to auto draft, but I'm actually having the best season I've ever had.
Our software works.
Auto draft, yeah. The software works really well.
Ryan, how's your team doing?
When you work at ESPN, you get pulled into so many leagues that you're rooting for one player, and he's hurting half your teams, beating half. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a lot of teams.
Hopefully not the Raiders, is my guess. So I want to get into the aspect of the community that you tapped and why. I mean, at least from the outside, I think of sports fans as sports fans. You know, fantasy football is a completely different sort of, I think, category of sports fan. But why was this right for what James and Crowdfunding was doing, like, in terms of like tapping into a community and leveraging that?
Sure. So there's kind of two parts to that question. The first is, why was this right? And the answer, I mean, really simply is it's a known, clear pain point. And it addressed something that was not an ancillary problem. I mean, it was, you know, it's commonly understood and identified. At the root of sports are social. At the root of fantasy is inherently a community. It's a large community that is broken down into 8, 10, 12 at a time. And we've thought a lot about what community means to us, and without kind of deep interaction with it, or moderation is the wrong term, but it can quickly devolve into go Cowboys, I hate the Cowboys.
Right.
And it kind of breaks at that. And what you see with fantasy is just really deep engagement. A lot of it's happening on ESPN. A lot of it happens offline, and that's great. And what we've tried to address community for ESPN is how do you elevate the conversation? How do you make it personal? And there have been three really kind of key things that we've worked on that have worked. The first is a move to identity. So obviously we put out a ton of content on a daily basis. Editorial team and talent is unmatched across anything else in sports. And simple things like using Facebook as a qualifier for conversation, it lifts the quality of engagement. The second and the most impactful thing that we have done from a social and community perspective is, while yes, there's a focus on enabling sharing and making it as frictionless and fast as possible, our focus has been what happens in those native environments. Mm-hmm. Making sure that the Twitter card itself is beautiful, it's fun, it's unique, and fantasy is a great example of that. So during your draft, one-click share to a Twitter card that shows your roster, solicits input. Who should you start or sit on Monday night? You know, and we have celebrity athletes saying, the interactions.
You should sit me. Yeah.
Fastest growing part of our video business is, you know, again, frictionless, one-click video play within the Twitter feed. Making sure that our stuff natively ports. And then the third is, and you hear people at Facebook talk about this all the time, what are the special moments? And those special moments, that's when you induce the sharing and so forth. And for us, fantasy has tons of them, right?
Right.
Draft, start, sit, I beat you, I have a logo, I created a logo, and take advantage of those moments to force the sharing and the social activity.
So that community, again, is especially well suited to things that like Tilt and other sort of forms of community and sharing. James, for you guys at Tilt, how are you seeing, you know, your platform and crowdfunding moving outside of sort of the places that we usually associate with crowdfunding? I think
it is something that it's, you know, the way we talk about, the way we think about it is, this is the next layer of the web that we're watching being built, and we're part of building it to where you have these communities online that want to do things together offline. And you have things like us, other crowdfunding platforms that allow communities that exist on a Facebook group and a Twitter following feed on an ESPN Fantasy Football League. You have 12 people, you have 1,200 people that want to do something as a group. They're already self-organizing on these platforms, forming these communities. But invariably, they will want to do something offline together. With fantasy football, it's been so cool to watch. And this is what's just so cool about Tilt. In general, you get to watch these communities that most of the time they just exist online, do things offline together.
Like, for example?
For example, fantasy football, they'll collect their money for their league through Tilt, and then 3 days later, they'll collect money for their draft party. And this epic draft, and you just look at these draft parties, and you can tell that they're putting $900 into a 3-hour event, renting a back room of a bar. And from us, we're constantly elated when we get to see these communities and these ties that exist online turn into really offline special moments and experiences. And you see some of these. There was a draft party. I think we saw one that was like $6,000 to rent out an entire bar because it had the biggest 120-foot big screen that they wanted to use for their draft. That was like 12 guys that decided to have a night of their life that they'll probably remember forever. And just having that tool, having the community that exists, and then having a tool to be able to do something cool offline.
James, you had another suggestion for another product, which I think both of you are excited by, but the lawyers at ESPN may not have found so palatable. Just tell us what that was.
Someone was telling me to tiptoe around this question.
A lawyer, probably.
Yeah, it's well. The actual answer was and the idea is very simple. And I thought it was, in my exuberant youth, I was like, they're going to love this idea. This is social media gold. It was to have, in some weekend last year, Magic Johnson said he was going to put up $1 million for LeBron James to do the dunk contest. And then his Twitter feed just started blowing up of people saying, I'll put in $10, I'll put in $50, I'll put in $100, I'll put in $15. And then you had Kevin Durant say, I'll put in $50,000. And you had Richard Sherman say, I'll put in $50,000. And that is that's why we're building Tilt, is you have this disparate, disconnected demand within a group around an objective and no way to aggregate that demand. Tilt is built for that. And so we mocked something up overnight and sent it to Ryan. I was like, we need to do this to where Magic Johnson is hosting a crowdfunding campaign, branded ESPN for LeBron to do the dunk contest. I thought it was slam dunk. Actually, that was no pun intended. But I thought it was going to work out really well. And Ryan was like,
we talked about it.
He was like, no. It was a very curt reply. It was like, no, I don't think so.
Fun idea. I think we happened upon something a little more lasting.
Yes, it was much more substantial.
Idea.
So let me ask you, Ryan, and James, you too, but let's start with you, Ryan. You have these, hardcore fans and viewers and watchers of what ESPN does, and you can collect data. And this gets to a little bit about what Jeff and Tim were talking about, how, if you're taking more than you're given from a data perspective, you're probably doing something wrong. But what I want to know is what you can know about your, fans and your audience, and then what you can use to monetize that. And how do you think about that?
So I have the luxurious position, ESPN has the luxurious position of fans want to tell us their interests, and they declare it. And that's different than a lot of other places. It's easier for us in that regard. Now, I don't think we've done a great job historically of rewarding you for doing so. So we've asked you to register, we've asked you to personalize. People take that step, and things haven't changed a ton. And we've started to, over the last year, we put a gate up in front of our largest mobile app, SportsCenter. And in a year, it went from 0% of people logged in because they were customizing to the device as opposed to the username. And it's now, around 70% of users are logged in, which for us is a pretty meaningful milestone. The next step is doing that on the site. And we're in the process, and it's in beta now with a about 100,000 randomly sampled users. But we're going to totally redesign ESPN.com. And a very significant chunk of the real estate across all pages is specifically for you versus me. So our experience will be very different. How that relates to monetization, a couple ways. What we are great at on monetizing. You heard it earlier when Chris and Jonah were talking. Video is really, really key to us, we know when we put the right content in front of you, video consumption goes up tremendously. On Saturday, we will cut 1,000 live clips from football across college football, and we'll buzz your phone within 15 seconds of those plays happening on the field. If you're a fan of Stanford and I'm a fan of Duke, we're going to buzz with different content, but we're going to enjoy it and open it. So we use it really to drive consumption. And yes, we can work with our partners, advertisers, to alter how that content looks or is modified based on geography, preference, et cetera. But really, what I spend my time thinking about is how do we reward people for the action of personalizing? And we're getting better. We got a ways to go.
How do you think about distribution? Jonah and Chris were talking about how they target Pinterest with this and Facebook with that, and people don't go through the front door of BuzzFeed. Do you guys have a front door? What relationship do you want with your audience? And is it different than what was being described by Jonah?
So we are fortunate to have a healthy, if you're a sports fan, it is an important front door of your day, ESPN.com. That's not to say that we don't think about or talk about how do we create your first experience as really your homepage. Instead of ESPN.com, what you come through, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, email. The other complicator for us is your front door no longer is necessarily on a big 20-inch browser. Last month, 55% of our users exclusively accessed us on a mobile device. That's and that acceleration over a 12-month period is pretty wild. So the front door on a native app versus a mobile web versus big screen, whether it's fantasy, it's a different front door than if you're live streaming the game last night.
Right.
We're trying to make them visually and from a user experience perspective as consistent as possible, but we also have to honor that your front door within fantasy needs to tell you one thing, and it's how you're doing.
Right.
And your front door during Monday Night Football should be the game as frictionless as possible.
So, James, again, knowing what you can know about your customers, the folks that use Tilt, how far can you go with that knowledge, and how do you use it, and how do you sort of, I guess, hold back too at the same time?
I think right now, especially with, so our platform grows pretty virally. You use it for a fantasy football league, and out of those 12 people, 2 will split off, start their own campaign, and they'll do it for a draft party, a tailgate, a late night party, a group trip, or something like that. So really, our biggest focus is retention of that virality, and not to try to maximize the acquisition of new users by using that information against them. We really just want them to naturally, it's a testament to the product, just naturally use and love the product without us getting too much in their face. With ESPN specifically in the partnership, it was the way that it worked was pretty, and Ryan was just saying this backstage, that it was really seamless to where there wasn't much of a passover of information. It really was, you use fantasy football here, click on this button, go over and start collecting your money over there. And it was a pretty seamless transition. There wasn't much being passed on.
Did people spin out then to other Tilt campaigns because of ESPN? And
yeah, they did.
Did you get Tilt people on ESPN, I don't know, doing something else?
I don't know if you guys got Tilt traffic going back to ESPN, but I know that it was a huge differentiator from other fantasy football platforms that don't provide this ability to collect your dues. And it was, I think the CTO was, on y'all's side, was telling us that it's one of the highest, maybe highest uptick in a brand new feature that they've seen. So yeah. It was a really, really exciting moment to see their adoption just be so high. But you're distributing this link, ESPN.tilt, everywhere with the ESPN logo. And it's further, and a lot of people, I don't know the numbers on it, a lot of people are in multiple leagues across different platforms. And if they see that one has ESPN logo for this functionality and the others don't, I think that would have a big impact on them.
All right, final question, gentlemen. Any football predictions?
I'm a Patriots fan, so.
I'm a Cowboys
Sunday.
Fan. And I'm a Cowboys fan, so we'll win, I think, the next 7 Super Bowls if we just model this out. No, I'm just kidding. We lost pretty terribly last night. And our quarterback almost died. So that's not good.
Good luck to your sad teams. I'm sorry. James, thank you. Ryan, thank you so much.
Michael, thank you.
Thank you.